Welcome to the Reconnection Club podcast, the show that helps parents heal troubled relationships with their adult sons and daughters. I'm your host, psychotherapist Tina Gilbertson. Each week, I'll offer you compassion, clarity, and personal development tips designed to help you reconnect, not only with your child, but with yourself. Now let's get started. In any estrangement, there are often puzzles to be solved and uncertainties to be tolerated. And there's a natural tension between actively working towards solutions and allowing the situation to evolve for the time being without further input. For some unwillingly estranged parents, this tension between active and passive doesn't really exist, either because the parent is constantly working on the problem and therefore always active, or because the parent is resigned that there's nothing he can personally do to facilitate reconciliation, and so he remains in passivity. In undesirable and challenging circumstances like unwanted estrangement, it takes wisdom to know when to be active and when to sit still. Both activity and patience may be required at different times. This is captured beautifully in the serenity prayer, which asks for the serenity to accept the things we cannot change, courage to change the things we can, and wisdom to know the difference. If they lack access to this wisdom, parents may wait and pray when there are things they could be doing to improve the situation, but then become active when the better course would be to wait and see. I've witnessed this push and pull many times, and seen the frustration and despair it can create in parents. So I started to wonder, how do we find that wisdom to know the difference between the things we can change and the things we can't? What do wise people have or do that the rest of us could cultivate? I think managing the tension well between active and passive using wisdom could alleviate some of the tremendous suffering of many parents and help them find more moments of peace even during estrangement. As I thought about how to invite that needed wisdom, the following 5 practices presented themselves. I don't know firsthand what makes someone wise. I can only observe people who seem wise to me and speculate based on their behavior. There are probably many ways to gain wisdom, but I offer these 5 practices as potentially useful. The first practice is a slow pace. Slowing things down for ourselves mentally and physically allows more room for consideration, mindfulness, and patience, all of which are rightfully associated with wisdom. Whereas haste is known only to make waste. It seems to me, then, that a wise person takes her time in all things. The second practice that would appear to support wisdom is tolerance of emotion, because without that, we flail. As I said in my Constructive Wallowing book, emotions are pushy. If we can't invite them into our consciousness and tolerate them, they tend to hijack our behavior. A wise person seems to act from knowledge that may be informed by emotion, but they don't act impulsively out of intolerable feelings. The third practice is agency. Agency is the ability and willingness to take constructive action on our own behalf. A wise person who's hungry doesn't continue to sit at an empty table. They get up and go in search of food. That's an example of agency. The fourth practice is boundaries. The wise person doesn't expend energy trying to influence how other people think. They recognize the freedom and sovereignty of all people, including themselves, and so they focus their energy on tending their own gardens. They know that the beauty and bounty they create there is the greatest influence any of us can have. The fifth practice is integrity. When we have integrity, we don't just hold certain values, we live those values. If we value respect, forgiveness, or compassion, we try to embody those as often as we can in our behavior toward ourselves and others. The wise person usually places integrity above most other considerations because they understand their relationship with themselves to be the foundation of all their relationships. Any of those 5 practices, which I'll review briefly in a moment, may be affected by trauma, especially agency and boundaries. If you carry the burden of untreated trauma, I assure you that your innate wisdom is still intact. However, your access to it may be hampered at times by the long-term effects of trauma, meaning that trauma-focused treatment with a qualified professional might help you fully engage in the 5 practices and restore more access to that innate wisdom that you have. Here again are the 5 practices I mentioned for inviting wisdom in difficult times. 1. A slow pace, making room for thoughtful and mindful living. 2. Tolerance of emotion, because the opposite leads to careless behavior. 3. Agency, the ability and willingness to take constructive action. 4. Boundaries, that is, knowing what's yours to influence and what belongs to others. And lastly, number 5, integrity, being a living example of what matters most to you. I touched on that aspect of integrity in episode 92, Lead by Example, which you can find at reconnectionclub.com/92. Finding the serenity to accept what we can't change, and the courage to change the things we can, well, we each have to find our own way with those, but the wisdom to know the difference may be fortified by exploring those 5 and other related practices. Until next time, remember that you are a loving, lovable, and still growing human being. So please take good care of yourself. Bye for now. If you've enjoyed this episode of the Reconnection Club podcast, I invite you to check out reconnectionclub.com. The Reconnection Club is for parents at any stage of estrangement from their adult, child, or children. So whether you've just realized there's trouble between you, you've been living with estrangement for years, or you're newly reconciled but still walking on eggshells, the Reconnection Club is your essential resource for information, support, and continued personal growth. With our courses and workshops, expert interviews, monthly Q&A calls, and a friendly, active community, the Reconnection Club is a wonderful place to be for anyone suffering the pain of estrangement from an adult, child, or children. So check it out at reconnectionclub.com.